Muslims to know is that in primary and secondary, parents can actually ask, that their children do not take part in sexual education, right? I think up to the years of 16. But you cannot withdraw your children from relationship education in primary or secondary. Yeah. You find now books in literature, aimed at teaching about LGBT right from the ages of 2, right? So right from the age of 2 till adult books, there's a theme of LGBT literature, and Stonewall and the National Education Union, they really promote this in school, to talk about and to teach about LGBT families and identities, etc. In the US, it's very common now that many libraries, they host drag queen story hours. Basically, a drag queen is a man who dresses up, really exaggerates, right, with a lot of makeup and dress, and teaches and reads, right, to children. Okay, so this is really common now in the US. In media, you find there's an overrepresentation of LGBT characters in films. If you look at Netflix and major film production studios, there's a overrepresentation, or there's a policy now that every film has to have some characters who identify as LGBT openly, right? And even many popular children's cartoons now have LGBT characters, and I'm sure you all heard the recent controversy with Disney's film Lightyear, which had an openly lesbian kiss, and it was banned in, I think, 13 or 14 Muslim countries, right? Including some of the Middle Eastern countries and the Arab countries. Okay. Now, there's a Stonewall again. LGBT. There's an influence of LGBT. Promotion of the LGBT rights, etc. in sports. Stonewall, they created a campaign, and they do this every year, where the teams, right, they wear rainbow laces, right, and this is many of even the Premier League teams wear rainbow laces to promote LGBT acceptance. Recently, in France, a Muslim player, he faced a lot of backlash from media, from the football organizations, for refusing to just take part. He said, I don't want to play. That's it. He didn't speak out or anything. He said, I don't want to play in a match where I have to wear a rainbow-colored number, shirt with rainbow-colored number on it. That's it. He refused to play it, and he stayed quiet, but he received a lot of backlash. Now, why aren't you actively taking part in promoting LGBT rights? Okay. And now in politics, there's a lot of pressure on many Muslim countries to promote LGBT rights and to accept them. A few months back, Lewis Hamilton, the racer, he criticized and condemned Saudi Arabia for having these repressive laws against the LGBT community. And many pundits around the world on media, they've been criticizing Qatar and asking FIFA to ban their World Cup because Qatar does not promote or accept LGBT identity or the LGBT rights. Okay. And now what's shocking is that even Disney, they are now involved in a lot of political affairs, right? And a lot of political issues regarding the LGBT. Okay. And scholars have been banned from European countries for just teaching the normative Islamic rulings regarding homosexuality and the LGBT. Okay. Now, the question is, right, how did we get here, right? Or right? How did the LGBT movement, how did it start? Where did it start from, right? It's probably very difficult to pinpoint an exact point, right, where it started or how it gained pace. But you can, many scholars have written that about the sexual revolution, which started in the 1930s, right, and really gained pace in the 1960s, right? And what is this? This was a Western movement, right? So this took place in European countries and in America, in the States, where there was a rejection of Christian values, right? Norms, ethics, when it came to things like the family unit, sex and sexuality, right? A complete abandonment of sexual values, right? Christian values. And what was this? What did it, this was a normalization of contraception. You see, in Islam, contraception is not haram, right? But until recently, majority of the Christians, they believe contraception was forbidden and was not permitted, right? And it was not so long ago when contraception was actually banned in Europe, right, in Christian countries. So this is a normalization of contraception and the pill. Before, people were afraid to, just outright have sexual relations because they feared pregnancy, right? Because of the fear of pregnancy that the woman might get pregnant, and to avoid this, they tried to refrain from engaging in many sexual relations or with different partners. But when in the 60s the birth control pill became widely popular, now there was no fear, right? And this really led to just engaging in many sexual relations with multiple partners, right? Because there was no longer fear of the woman getting pregnant. Public nudity, pornography, believe it or not, was banned in many Christian countries. But since the sexual revolution, this ban was lifted. Homosexuality and other alternative forms of sexuality now gained acceptance into society, right? Now, what did this lead to? This led to the demise of the family system, right? The nuclear family, that was the norm, and the family values that were there, they were no longer, they no longer had the same norm or acceptance in society as they were before the sexual revolution, right? And now, as a result of the sexual revolution, it was gay rights movements, right, that you see they rose and they gained popularity in the West, right? Before this, it wasn't so common, right? The gay rights movement, this was one of the results of the sexual revolution, that homosexuality and gay rights movement, they began as a result of this, of sexual liberation now, yeah? Before the sexual revolution, it wasn't common for people to, sex was a taboo, right? So you didn't talk about it in families or in places, formal places. You didn't speak about it, or you didn't use these kind of words, right? But now people were openly discussing sex and sexuality, right? Okay. Now, what happened? The modern Western culture, as a result of the sexual revolution, it separated three things which ought to be, bound together by religion and by nature. And what are these three things? Sex, reproduction, and marriage and morality, right? Or sexual morality. What does this mean? Well, you see, sex is not for if you look at it Islamically, right? Sex is not just a meaningless thing, right? Or it's not just an act that you do, right? It's supposed to be a spiritual act that you do in a certain context, and that's in the context of marriage, right? And it's not without consequences, right? You're responsible for whatever happens as a result of sexual intercourse. You're responsible for this, right? And that is reproduction, right? And these things, sex and sexuality, reproduction, these they have an important role when it comes to morality. And what is that role? Every culture that we have, whether it's Islamic culture or just non-Muslim culture, sexuality or sex plays a huge role in society and how society is, right? Or the ethics of that society, right? Now, it's your morality, right? When you have sexual morality or when you have ethics, that will tell you, right? Those ethics will tell you, okay, what kind of relationship is fine, or when is it okay to engage in sexual intercourse, right? And when it's not. But when you take that away, the question of morality from sex, then people will engage in sex to fulfill their their desires, right? Without wanting to take on the responsibility that comes with it, right? Sex becomes meaningless, right? And the spirituality behind it, or the spiritual aspect to it, it becomes meaningless now. Okay. And as a result of the sexual revolution, three things which ought to be separate, and this is very important, right? Three things which ought to be separate, they became one. And what is that? Your desires, how you feel, what you feel, actions, and identity, right? How you feel, the kind of actions you do, and your identity, these all become one now, right? So now the question of someone identifying as gay, this becomes a question of identity, right? If you look at throughout history, right, people engaged in homosexual behavior, in all societies, but it was an act that they did. It was not something who they were. Nobody identified as said I'm gay. It's an act that they did, not who they were, right? So even if you look at the people of Lut alayhi salam, these were people who had families. They had wives, they had children, right? But they engaged in this act, right? And just because you feel something, right, Islamically, you feel something doesn't mean that you go and engage in that act or you carry out that act, right? But as a result of the sexual revolution, your desires, the actions that you do, and your identity, now it all became one. Yeah. Okay. Now, a few things to mention. That when you look at the Islamic concept, when it comes to sexual ethics or morality, Islam is not sex negative. Right? It's not, right? Neither does it promote abstaining from marriage. The Arabic word for that is rahbaniya, right? Abstinence from. The Prophet ﷺ said, "La rahbaniya fil Islam." That there's no staying away from marriage in Islam, right? There's no abstinence from marriage. Some of the Christian teachings, on the other hand, they seem quite sex negative, right? You see Christian scholars giving, when it comes to sexuality or when it comes to sexual pleasure, it was more of something that you do just for reproduction and not for enjoyment, right? So they have quite a few. They have some negative views on sexual intercourse and even of women, but Islam is not like that, right? The Prophet in Islam, it's completely fine for someone to engage in sex for pleasure, right? Even if they don't want to do it as for reproduction, right? Now, where does the sexual revolution begin, or what influences this? You can find this in 17th century, 18th century, 19th century European thought, going back to Enlightenment, where basically revelation, and a Christian revelation, the Bible, it no longer became the standard, right, of knowledge, and it was the human reasoning which was now the standard, a rejection of revelation. We find in the 19th century liberalism, which becomes focused on individual freedom, right, and personal autonomy, right. You find thinkers like Rousseau, who spoke about what is the true identity of a person. It said a person's true identity is what he feels inside, right? And that you can only truly be who you are if you carry out how you feel inside, right? And of course, Karl Marx, who saw religion as a sign of weakness, and said that freedom can only be established if you, when we abolish religion altogether, right? Sigmund Freud, who saw sex as foundation to human happiness, and argued that even infants were sexual, or they were sexually attracted to their parent of the opposite sex. Okay. Now, what is the Islamic concept? What does the Quran say about the family values, or we could say the institution of marriage? First of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes it explicit in the Quran that He created men and women, and He created the institution of marriage is based on the male and the female, right? So Allah says, وَأَنَّهُ خَلَقَ الزَّوْجَيْنِ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى, and He created the pairs, males and females. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. That one of the signs of God is that He created for you spouses from amongst yourself, so that you may find comfort in them, and He has placed between you compassion and mercy, right? And these are signs for people who reflect. Okay, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever, male or female, does good deeds and has faith, we shall give a good life and reward them according to best of their actions. Okay. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also created differences between the two genders. Yeah. This is why in the Quran Allah says, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى, the male is not like the female, right? When Maryam alayhi salam, when her mother gave birth, when she was expecting, she took an oath that this child is going to be for the service of God, inshallah, So when the child was born, it was a female, it was Maryam alayhi salam, right? So then she said that Allah knows the oath I took, and Allah knows that the son, she was expecting a son, because this was what was expected, right? But she said that the male is not like the female. But we know that there are biological differences between the males and the females, and in traits, men and women have masculine and feminine traits, and even religious laws are different, right? If we begin from the chapters of purity to chapters on prayer, to fasting, the Hajj, right? Inheritance, men and women, they have different laws, right? And there are many studies which show physiological, psychological, dispositional differences between men and women. And now, why has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created these biological differences? The reason we have these differences is that because we each serve a different purpose, right? And Allah has not created people differently, or the male and female differently, without a purpose. So the bodies that we have, right? they're there because they're supposed to serve a purpose. Right? Therefore, anyone who says that it's my body and it's my choice, they say, hey, this is incorrect. Right? Yes, it's your body, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you this body with a responsibility, and you'll also be asked about the responsibility. Right? So your body's not there to do as you please, rather it's there because you have to you have to take care of it, and it's your responsibility, and you have to fulfill that responsibility. Now, going to the question of morality, right? What is the basis of morality in Islam? Well, it's quite clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا كَانَ لِلْمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. That it's not for the believer, men and women, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet, they've decided something, right, that the believer doesn't have a choice. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided something, the Prophet ﷺ has decided a matter, something made halal or haram, then you don't have a matter. You must go according to it. And virtue and moral character is of the highest importance in Islam. Right? This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I've been sent to perfect your character. Right? And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said that when you no longer have any shame, then you go and do what you want. Right? إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِ فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. When you have no shame, then do what you want. He's not giving permission here. He's not saying that, okay, if you don't have shame, then you can do whatever you want, no problem. He's saying that when you no longer have shame, then you're going to end up doing what you want. Right? So, morals and ethics, they play a great role in Islam. And the Prophet said every religion has a characteristic trait. Right? And the trait of Islam is modesty, haya. In the contemporary discourse on morality, morals and ethics, right? Revelation, unlike Islam, revelation is irrelevant. In Islam, revelation, it's the center, it's the most important part, a basis for ethics and morality, right? But in the modern Western discourse on morality, revelation means nothing, right? And sexual morality is completely separate from this, right? This is why you find now many feminists promoting prostitution, called sex work, because they believe that this gives women autonomy and freedom of their own, it gives them independence, right? And you find many feminists who say that it's better for a woman to earn her living doing sex work than to be under a man in marriage, right? When sexual morality is complete, when you lose morality, then sex becomes meaningless, right? And in modern discourse, there's a centrality of notions of freedom, autonomy, and authenticity, right? What does freedom mean? Freedom is having no restrictions, right? Whether that's religious restrictions or family restrictions, any kind of restrictions. I was once getting a haircut. I know you can't tell, but I was getting a haircut, and I was speaking to my barber, a very intelligent guy, an Iranian, I believe, and we were speaking about freedom. He said, "Well, I'm not married because I like freedom." So I said, "Okay, are you really free? How free are you? What is freedom to you?" He said, "Well, I don't want to have family, constraints and be held down." I said, "Is this the only?" I said to him, "Look, just a few months back, you weren't allowed to step out of your house without a mask, right? You can't. How many freedom do you actually have? Right? You go late to work, you're going to be fired. Well, it was a barber, so I don't like to be fired. But generally, right? How free are we? Right? Perhaps we're free from things that might seem more of a burden than the other things, but how free are we actually, right? But there's the notion of freedom. This is what has become now the most important thing. on autonomy. Autonomy literally means to give yourself the law, right? That's what it means, to give yourself a law, the law, right? To do as you want, right? In Islam, we know that the law is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God and His Messenger, and it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can legislate. If you look at the recent debate that's taking place regarding abortion in the United States, you find that there's a focus on women's rights, and the right to choose what they want, the right to choose what they do with their bodies, right? But in reality, right? In reality, the underlying, concern for many of these people is that they won't be able to have their sexual freedom to engage in, unrestricted sexual intercourse and with unlimited partners, right? If we take away the right of abortion, if you want to call it a right, right? The topic's not abortion, but I'm just saying, just thinking to that. And then, of course, authenticity, that you can only be truly you if you carry out or do as you wish, or whatever you do. But we know in Islam, your true authenticity is in serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and acting upon the teaching of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, right? And of course, with this comes the issue of consequences, right? In modern Western discourse, consequences are limited to what we can see, right? So the question often Muslims ask that, well, why do you oppose LGBT if they're not doing you any harm, right? They're not saying anything to you, right? What's the issue? It has no consequences on you. So why are you against this, right? The thing is, this is a very subjective way of looking at consequences, right? If you think that consequences are only those, either financial or where there's a direct, immediate harm, then this is incorrect, because we know sexuality, and sex is something which has a ripple effect, and it has effect on society, and not just the individual. It's not ever something that's just between two people, or three or four, or whatever you choose, right? It's something that affects the entire society. And our virtue in the modern discourse has become completely irrelevant, right? What is virtue? It's not a real thing, right? Whereas the Islamic sexual morals, they are closely tied to family, and family law and family value, which are also central to Islam. Hence, sexual morality is also central to Muslims and to the society. And this is why zina is completely forbidden. That is, any kind of sexual intercourse or sexual relationship outside marriage between man and woman. And why is zina forbidden? Because Islam, it has some maqasid, right? Some objectives. What are these maqasid? It aims to safeguard religion, safeguard life, lineage, property, intellect, and honor, right? This is why, and zina is something which, we know it destroys a person's religion, right? It destroys a person's family, a person's honor, and it has effects on society beyond this person who's engaging in zina. And the consequences of zina, obscuring of lineage, people not knowing who the father is, and it, of course, undermines family, the institution of marriage itself. And of course, we've been taught in Islam to minimize zina by controlling your nafs, controlling your eyes, right, lowering your eyes, avoiding khalwa, that's being alone, any kind of being alone, men and women being alone at any time, this is something that's completely forbidden, right? And for men and women, modest dress and behavior, right? We often forget that modest dress is also for men, not just for our sisters, right? Now, in Islam, what is permitted? All sexual relationship between a married couple, man and woman, are allowed, right? Everything else is prohibited, and Islam is quite clear about this. All sexual acts that fall short of intercourse, right, or that lead to intercourse, that's haram. Anal intercourse for men and women, right? It's not just something that's what you can refer to as liwat. Right? It's not just something which is not allowed for gay couples. It's also something which is completely forbidden for men and women. Being naked, exposing your aura without a need, right? This is haram. Masturbation, according to majority, this is haram. And anything that leads to zina is also prohibited. Okay. Now we know in the modern discourse there's a fixation on consent, right? As long as there's consent, then everything should be fine, right? Yeah. As long as there's consent, then everything should be fine. But this is the entire notion of consent is a very, very modern and recent idea, right? This is a very recent idea that even between men and women, you have to, even between husband and wife who are married, right? There has to be consent, right? This idea itself is a modern idea, right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that the idea that as long as there's consent, then everything should be fine. This is not entirely correct or in line with the Islamic morals. Now, what is homosexuality? Contemporary, ideas of homosexuality are built up of three things. Number one, feelings of romantic or sexual attraction, and this goes back to what we said about desires, right? Engaging in a relationship or sexual behaviors with the same sex, and this what we said about actions, right? And number three, adopting a personal and social identity based on such feelings, right? And this is what we said about identity, right? Modern, and this also goes back to the LGBT movement, right? Because the movement wants to include as many people as possible, even those who just feel, right, sexual attractions, just the desires, right? There's a push for them to, join this movement and make this their identity, right? But like I said before, this is something that was very new, and culturally, this is only restricted to the modern West. You don't find this in any society or culture before.
Any example of that?
Of what, sorry?
That social identity. What?
So, the LGBT movement,
Yeah.
this is an identity.
Yeah.
People who identify as being gay, because the point was that people now, when we say homosexuality, right, is this completely the same as saying gay, right? Or engaging in the act, right? Just engaging in the act or having the feelings, right? This is different to identifying as someone who agrees with all of the things that the LGBT movement promotes, right? That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So someone can be, someone can have the attractions or even engage in the actions, but they don't really have to agree with the movement, the LGBT movement.
I think, Sheikh, another thing is, once we talk about the identity, it's very closely linked to rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So as soon as you identify as somebody,
Mm-hmm.
now you're asking for rights for those people.
Yeah.
Whereas anybody who practices any such thing, but they don't necessarily identify themselves as such, they're not going to ask for that right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a casual kind of thing for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. This is quite important to know. Yeah. But we know that not distinguishing between desires and acts, right? This is, morally, this is problematic, right? Why is it problematic? Because we know Islamically someone who has desires, right? They're not blameworthy for this. There's no blame on them for having these desires, as long as they don't go and they don't go and put themselves in an environment, right, where these desires, there'll be a promotion, or they'll be more inclined to act on these desires. Then just having the attraction or the desires, it doesn't make someone a gay as an identity. Yeah. But we know in the contemporary discourse, it combines these three things: the desires, actions, and identity into one, and hence where we get the LGBT movement. Okay. Now, going back to this again, that our modern Western culture, it separates three things which ought to be together. There is sex, reproduction, and marriage, and sexual morality, and it combines three things which ought to be kept separate: desires, actions, and identity. Okay. Now you can no longer, this is why, what I said at the beginning, that you can no longer say to someone that as long as you don't do the actions, then this is fine, right? Or you can't say to them that that your actions we don't agree with your actions, right? We respect you, etc. We don't agree with the actions, right? The reason why you can't say to them is this, because for them the action is their identity, right? The action is their identity. So you can't, but we have to separate actions from identity, right? When it comes to homosexuality, right? Even if someone engages in them, it's something that they do, not something who they are, right? And now the modern identity, the LGBT, identifying as LGBT, it brings with it, a lot of baggage, because you have to agree with the entire, framework and everything that they promote. Okay. Now, what are the verses on homosexuality? You find the story of Surah, you find the story of Prophet Lut alayhi salam in the Quran. According to some estimation, 100 verses to the story of Lut alayhi salam. That's quite significant, so it's not something that we can just take lightly, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. Lut, when he said to his people that, do you commit a shameful deed that no man has ever done before? إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. Do you lust after men, right, instead of women? You are certainly transgressors. What did they reply? وَمَا كَانَ جَوَابَ قَوْمِهِ إِلَّا قَالُوا أَخْرِجُوهُمْ مِنْ قَرْيَتِكُمْ إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٌ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ. That the only answer that they had was, take these guys out of your city. These are people who want to be pure, right? فَأَنْجَيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ إِلَّا امْرَأَتَهُ كَانَتْ مِنَ الْغَابِرِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we saved Lut and those who believed in him, except his wife. She was amongst those who were doomed. وَأَمْطَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَطَرًا فَانظُرْ كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala poured upon them rain of stone, and look at what was the end of the wicked. Now what you find is that some Western academics, they've tried to reinterpret the verses of the story of Lut alayhi salam to say that, look, the surah is not talking about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not talking about homosexuality. He's not talking about same-sex relationship. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about is rape, that they were raping each other. And that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. Right? This is called revisionism. Right? What is revisionism?
The
It's
raping with I mean with the woman, no, with the homosexual raping. What?
homosexual raping. Right? So this is revision. Revisionism is basing your contemporary notions and projecting them back in history, right? And trying to change historical events or ideas based on our contemporary notions. All right, but this is whoever's engaged in this this kind of revisionism. It's based on very feeble evidence and arguments, and this is a long, detailed article which completely, critiques this idea. Right? It's called "Can Islam Accommodate Homosexual Acts? Quranic Revisionism and the Case of Scott Cougar." Scott Cougar was a person who argued for this, right? That the people of Lut al-Islam, they were not engaging in homosexual acts, right? Rather, they were punished because of homosexual rape, and not the actual act. There's no issue with that, right? I'm not even going to entertain this because this is. If you went to the Prophet ﷺ, or you went to any of the Sahaba, and you try to argue with them, right? You think they would accept this, right? A basic, if you ever come across an opinion which you find really strange, just think to yourself: if I presented this opinion to the Sahaba, right, or the Prophet ﷺ, how would he react? Would he accept it? Or say, yeah, you have a point? Or would he, completely reject this? Right? And of course, when our entire scholarship has agreed on something, not one individual from our scholarship has doubted this, right? Then this is not something that's even worth giving any kind of thought to. Now, what does Islam say about homosexuality? Firstly, we must distinguish between desires, act, and identity. Right? Between desires, act, and identity. Someone who feels same-sex attraction, right? They're not sinful, just for the feeling. Right? Where does Islam draw the line? Is that it's quite clear that Islam and the Quran prohibits engaging in this act and acting upon your desires, just like any other kind of sin that we have, right? Just like a man and a man might feel attraction towards another woman, right? Especially if not married to her, right? Of course, if not married to her, there's no, green pass for them to go and fulfill their desires, right? Similarly, when it comes to homosexuality, we must distinguish between desires, act, and identity, right? We don't see, even if someone who engages in the act, we don't see this as their identity. Okay? And of course, the Sharia addresses the acts and not the desires, which are beyond someone's control. Okay? Now, what I will say is that as Muslims, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has given us a framework for humanity, and a way in which humanity continues, right? And a way of reproduction, right? And that is the best framework of morality, and it's something that we should be, as Muslims, be proud of, right? We shouldn't be, in doubt about our Islamic teachings or ethics, right? Because we know that what the framework that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the best way to live, Okay. And similarly, we should avoid even Muslims, right? And this is, should be quite open about this. There are many Muslim brothers, sisters, practicing, non-practicing, who, definitely get the desires, right? And some might even be engaged in relationships, right? But as Muslims, we should avoid, right, terms such as gay or LGBT, right? This is not their identity. And we should actually help them to understand that, okay, you might be engaged in this, but this is not your identity. Someone who drinks alcohol, that's not their identity. All right? They don't live their entire life based on on being drunk. It's not their identity, and that's the same. It goes the same for every other sin, right? And now, but we know that we should not be turning away Muslims.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
But of course, recently there has been a concerted effort by a lot of Muslims identifying themselves as homosexuals, and they're championing the rights, especially in the States. How do you address those people?
I've just about to do it now.
Okay.
Right. When it comes to offering support, right, we have to identify. We have to distinguish between individuals and doing something on a community level, right? We should welcome, right, or offer as much support as we can to individuals who need the support, right, who need consultation, right? We should make them feel welcome in the masjid, not turn them away. The reason I say this is because, and this unfortunately happens in Muslim communities, Muslims turn Muslims away, and they are welcomed by non-Muslims, right? Even though, okay, they might be doing something wrong in one aspect of their life, but now what happens is they're accepted by into non-Muslim ideas like the LGBT movement, right? And now the entire life becomes this, right? So when it comes to individuals, we should definitely offer as much support as we can, right? Make them feel welcome. Sometimes, because we have to understand, is that a lot of times your company, your influences, the movies that you watch, right? These are things that affect you, right? If they affect you in terms of your desires for a woman, then they're also going to affect you, people who are affected by same-sex desires, especially now when it's become so open. You find out in movies there's open same-sex scenes, right? The homosexual scenes now in movies openly, right? So that's what we should be doing, right? We should be helping individuals to realize and support the efforts to realize their purpose as Muslims, right? But as a community, right, and those who want to sort of infiltrate, and there's a directed effort to infiltrate Muslim spaces now, right? Muslims so far have not, if you look at the majority of the churches, right, they've bought into this idea and they've openly accepted this. But churches only in Western countries, not churches in the rest of the world. They haven't bought into this or accepted it. They do not promote LGBT teaching. So when it comes to Muslims, we should have zero tolerance, right, for those people who want to influence Muslim spaces, masajid, madrasas, and teach and promote this, right? Activists who want to make Muslims accept and accommodate, right? Muslims are there to help and offer any support they can, right? But for activists, individuals, organizations who want Muslims to promote and openly accept LGBT views and teachings, then this is something that we cannot do. Why? Because this would be a betrayal of our coming generations, our children. This would be an absolute betrayal of them. Because if we openly accept a view, then we might think to ourselves, well, okay, we're just aligning with them politically, or there's benefit. How long are you actually going to keep up this mentality? Right? It's not going. If we look at, there's a lot of research now that shows that all of the churches which promoted and accepted LGBT views, right? All of these churches, their numbers have declined. Right? People had this idea, right? Christians had the idea that, okay, we know what, we'll welcome people with open arms, but none of these churches have managed to bring in people. All of their numbers have declined. And we know our deen. Look, one of the great things about Muslims is that we are very stubborn. And I say this in a good way. Right? We are stubborn upon our deen. Right? Which, otherwise, why else would someone wake up 4:30 in the morning and pray Fajr? Right? And this is something, when people say, oh, Muslims are intolerant. Well, we are intolerant for the right reasons. Right? Because as Muslims, we are absolutely proud of our teachings. Right? And we don't need anyone to accept us based on their terms. Right? If you're not going to accept Muslims and their teachings, then you don't need to put up a fake sort of these fake tolerance ideas. Oh, we're tolerant, we're here for you, right? As long as you accept all of our liberal ideas, right? Muslims do not need to do this. Okay.
What about this Judaism? Are the Jews they still?
I will tell you something.
Stance on it?
So with Jews, you find also those who are revisionist Jews who have accepted it as well. Majority of the Jews, they are very staunch and very clear about what their teaching is. In fact, the government minister Michael Gove, right, not so long ago, he was on the news for saying that Jewish schools must be respected for their teachings on LGBT. This is the same guy who identifies as the Islamophobe of the 21st century, and who led the entire Trojan horse hoax, right? Who spearheaded the entire this hoax. This is the same guy who said the Jewish schools and institutions must be respected for the views, because Jews clearly said that, okay, we're not going to teach this. We don't want anything to do with them. Right? And you know what? Well done to them. Right? They were quite firm on their stance, and Muslims should also be. Okay? And we should realize that our Islamic teachings, whether someone accepts it or not, they are not embarrassment at all. People laugh at, you wait until marriage for sex. Right? People laugh at this. Right? What's really shocking is that now in contemporary, modern time, not, of course, non-Muslim parents who see their children as failures if they've not lost their virginity or engaged in sexual relationship by the age of 15, 16, etc. Right? This is completely foreign to Islam. Right? We are absolutely proud of our teachings, and we should, realize that the Islamic teachings are the solutions. Right? If you want to influence society, then you have to, actually believe in your teachings. Right? You can't be wishy-washy about them, right? And then think that people will adopt them. No, that's not how you influence. Okay. Now,